more. Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz and House Minority Whip Steve Scalise. Good to see you both. Congressman Scalise, I start with you. Now, we now know inflation is at a high. 65 cents on average, the increase in gas since Joe's been president. Joe gives Putin a waiver to build a pipeline while simultaneously canceling the Keystone XL pipeline and firing people that have high-paying career jobs. And now we're energy dependent once again after achieving independence after 75 years. How are any of these policies good for the American people?
Yeah, this is insanity, Sean. If you look at what he did with Keystone on day one, just eviscerating thousands of American jobs. And by the way, offending our friend and neighbor, Canada. Canada makes this oil. It's going to go be refined somewhere. You would want it to be refined in America where we have better policies. But now, not only did that, he adds insult to injury to all those workers who are now out of a job by saying he's okay with pipelines in Russia, from Russia to Germany. So he gave a gift to Russia. You see unemployment through the roof. And in so many places, everywhere you go, they can't find workers because Joe Biden's paying people not to work. And then he gives money to states like Michigan, who are incredibly mismanaged. And Gretchen wants to pay people who are working part-time, still give them unemployment benefits. You wonder why there are lines at the pump. You wonder why you can't find lumber, 400% increase in lumber. It's going to cost you $30,000 more to build a home today than it did just a year ago. President Trump had this under control. We were coming out of this. We had an economy ready to take off again. We had a controlled border. And right now it's out of control. The border's out of control. Domestically, we're seeing inflation going through the roof. We're paying people not to work. And then he's given a gift to our enemies like Russia and China, wants to give the vaccine away, the intellectual property, to China. What's going on in the White House right now?
Well, I mean, we've got to ask some tough questions here, Jason Chaffetz, and that is, OK, we now know that Joe Biden lied. We're going to get into this in more detail in our next segment. He said he'd never had any discussions with Hunter about his foreign business dealings. But he did have dinner while as vice president with Hunter and oligarchs and all these people that he was doing business with. So he lied. But the question is, is he compromised? Hunter getting $3.5 million from Russia, 2 cyber attacks, he says nothing. He gives a waiver to Putin, but not to American workers on a pipeline. With China, we don't want to rock the boat with China in any way. Well, Hunter had business there, too. And my question is, where is the investigation into conflicts of interest with Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and all these countries that are hostile to us?
Because a lot of this goes back to his time as vice president, one of the things that has to happen is there needs to be a letter, what's called a letter of preservation. When I was the chairman of the subcommittee on national security and Benghazi happened, I sent that to the Secretary of State. What that does is it widens the net. Instead of just having to comply with the Federal Records Act, it compels that person to preserve all other emails and communications. That's ultimately how we found out about Hillary's server and all the things that she did outside the Government Records Act. That needs to happen with Dr. Fauci. It needs to happen with Vice President Joe Biden in his dealings, because he can't just say, it's one thing for a politician to lie. That happens a lot. But when you're using the government resources and you are in a government position, I don't care how high it is, you cannot mislead Congress. You do have to provide those documents, but without the preservation letter in place, there are other ways to skirt around it. But ultimately, I think the truth will come out. And I'm working with Peter Schweitzer and the Government Accountability Institute, and I think you're going to see a lot of interesting things come out of that research.
Do you see possible compromise issues with Joe Biden, Congressman Scalise?
Well, these questions about his relationship and Hunter Biden's relationship with foreign countries was raised. Look at the New York Post. They raised the serious questions about Ukraine, and the New York Post's entire Twitter feed was shut down. They were kicked off of Twitter for sending out a story that turned out to be true. So all of these questions have been raised since before the election, and Joe Biden has never been asked this by the mainstream media because they want to give him a pass. They really don't care. They just hated Donald Trump. And I think that's quite evident that they're looking the other way, even with some of these latest scandals that we're seeing. How often does he get asked about the crisis at the border or these emails by Fauci?
All right, guys, thank you both. Steve Scalise, Jason Chaffetz.